Hello there, this is Cridical from Cridical Media. Just doing the top picks of 2024 from Marvel Comics. So as you can kind of see, yes, it is very omnibus heavy. Yes, pun fully intended, with one exception there. And that's the thing about me, folks. Just to give you guys perspective, I'm a fan of hardcovers. I find more integrity in those kinds of releases. And my preferred is the deluxe hardcover, oversized, or omnibus paper trim here. Yes, even Image Comics has the same kind of releases there, but they're let's put it this way, they're not really defined as deluxe. They change up the term all the time over there. But that's all besides the point. This is about Marvel today. And yes, just giving you guys a preface mainly because it's not to say that there aren't great stories out there. They'll come out in trade or whatever other format. I just prefer the tangible hardcovers. So yes, with that in mind, we'll kind of get started here with some of the extra pickups first before diving into the 2024 releases. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, before jumping into the 2024 releases, we're going to take a look at some honorable mentions. So these are books that were published in prior years. I just added them to the library as of 2024. And I guess the first book, poetically, is First X-Men by Christos Gage, and more importantly, Neal Adams here. Yes, Neal Adams is the main reason why I picked this up. So this is a standard hardcover, which it kind of plays like an Elseworlds. Yeah, it's purely done by Neal Adams here. And I have to admit, one thing I do really appreciate about this book, aside from, yes, this being Neal Adams' last swan song for Marvel before he passed away, is that essentially it kind of plays like the origin of Wolverine and Sabretooth's hatred of each other. I guess there's been many explanations behind their rivalry, even as recent as that Sabretooth War book. But I love the one that's introduced in this particular narrative. So personally, it's probably the most emotionally draining version of it. But I have to admit, it is so well done. I personally think of this as the real nature of Sabretooth's hatred of Wolverine. So definitely thought this was an interesting pickup. It is a very brief story though, so if you can, maybe just try and digest it digitally, or maybe just contemplate whether to add it to your library. Now comes a book that I've been waiting for a price drop for, and it finally came with Journey into Mystery, Volume 1, aka more so Mighty Thor, the original run. And it's funny, the more and more I look over at my bookshelf, the more I see that Thor keeps invading it. There's been more and more Thor just sneaking onto it. And I guess with this book, as well as another book you're about to see here, is a great reason why. So I like having the foundational work of characters, what brings out the core of the character. And yeah, you are getting some of those awesome original Jack Lee covers, along with other creators as well. Most importantly, yeah, Joe Sinnott. But I always found Thor to be a character where he shouldn't work. He doesn't make sense, and yet he does actually make sense, Or he shouldn't fit in our world, and yet somehow this mythological character still manages to have these awesome stories that somehow still manage to fit and have very clever ways of solving problems. I've always found that to be an interesting aspect of Thor. I guess my original drive or nuanced drive to it is Thor kind of starts off as kind of a version of Billy Batson, essentially, Captain Marvel, or Shazam to the layman, although he's back to being called Captain Marvel. And that character is one of my favorites. Marvel Comics basically used Thor as their version of the original Captain Marvel. The whole Donald Blake changing into Thor aspect. Yes, it does get explained a little bit later as to the true nature of Donald Blake and whatnot, but still, I definitely appreciated the approach to this book because, like I said, it's a character that shouldn't work and yet somehow still ended up with riveting stories. And another writer that you're going to see a little bit later in this video definitely used the core of this character to truly tell the future or kind of resonate his story through this book. So definitely appreciate this release, and I'm super happy that my local comic book shop had a great deal on it, finally adding it to the library. And speaking of which, a book that I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't own a little bit earlier, mainly because it came out around the same time that I got back into comics back in college, is the Ed Brubaker Captain America run. So these are only 3 of them. Yes, I am planning to get the first 2. See, these are more so the latter books. So Captain America Lives, you know, with the whole Cap Reborn story. The Trial of Captain America, where, yeah, Steve Rogers is back, but even Bucky has to deal with the whole Zemo going after him aspect. And then the return of the Winter Soldier, which surprisingly actually does have the Winter Soldier series in it. I never thought that would get collected in any sort of great format, but so I'm glad to see at least the Omnis give you a little bit of a larger paper trim presence to the book. And yes, I am still hunting for the first two. Volume 1, Brubaker, and also the Death of Captain America. That kind of finishes off or completes Ed Brubaker's run on the character. Such incredible work. I always find that that Ed Brubaker, he's one of the best writers, period. And his grounded storytelling just fits so well with this perfect character. So awesome to have. And now comes a book that shouldn't really come to many as a surprise, but yes, Mutant Massacre. In this case, yeah, it does seem to be a book that deserves to be on many people's shelves. Because aside from having that incredibly taxing and emotionally draining series with the whole Holocaust of the Morlocks by the Marauders, they really do sell the threat and menace and desperation that war created. Not to mention, you know, you get the kind of origins of Sabretooth, or at least some of his most pivotal appearances with the X-Men originally. Not to mention, you also get kind of a first take of, I guess technically you get a first take of Apocalypse in it. So pretty impressive there. I always love this little Daredevil story that kind of goes over the mania of Sabretooth, that he operates on certain rules and he's very primal in the beginning. I love how they even juxtapose the kid at home playing with a cat and the way Sabretooth acts. Very awesome. But two very special surprises of this release is that it also has the Fantastic Four versus the X-Men, where it has that dilemma of, you know, should you, you know, dance with the devil in order to save one of your friends? But more importantly, and my personal favorite story overall in this book is, yes, X-Men versus the Avengers. This is the one that introduces that idea of like this huge moral dilemma with Magneto. You know, is he really a world criminal or is he a soldier in a war? And, you know, there's different rules of how you can put this guy on trial. So it's such a true, emotionally draining and also huge moral dilemma that's introduced not just to the series, but even to the reader. Like, how would you handle the situation with Magneto? Is he a soldier or is he just a straight up murderer killer, right? Considering his modus operandi, the way Magneto operates, I do kind of think of him more as a soldier in a war, because he doesn't just kill randomly. He does operate with certain rules. But again, I love how this story challenges the reader, especially by the end. Like, would you have done what he would have done toward the end of the story? You know, the whole free will aspect and all that, you know, the whole sensibilities and race relations, even down to this particular panel. Very impressive work and impressive ground that was covered in that series. Super awesome to own, that's certainly for sure. And I would highly recommend having The Fall of the Mutants right after, because personally I tend to read X-Men as the Silver Age, then the 2 Uncanny volumes, then I jump to Mutant Massacre and Fall of the Mutants, just to kind of cover the 80s. It's a great way of condensing it, if you ask me. And now comes a book that I have huge suggestions for. So in this case, it's Star Wars The High Republic, mainly by Cavan Scott. I'll say this, Cavan Scott, he's like almost like one of those older Star Wars writers from like the Dark Horse era of comics, where he seems to just understand this medium so well. Like he has such a rich history and a rich background in telling these stories. Like you'd swear he was writing for Star Wars for decades. That's how good of a writer he is and how much he seems to understand these characters. Like, man, I'm so impressed every time I read it. But one thing I will criticize Marvel for is this. These Omnis, both Volume 1 and Volume 2, they're extremely short. They're like around 400 pages. And unfortunately, Marvel is pricing them like these bigger Omnis that you saw earlier. So thankfully, my local comic book shop had a great deal on this book, so super cheap. And that's what I would also suggest to you. Maybe just try and find these books on the cheap if you can, because as great as these stories are, it's just they're too short for the price tag that they're looking for. So that's just my recommendation to y'all. Just try to find a good deal on them. And it's funny, I brought up Cavan Scott just now, and I mentioned how he felt like a Dark Horse writer from back in the day. Because personally, anybody who's returning to this channel, you may know how much I loved the Dark Horse era of Star Wars. That was like my childhood in a nutshell. And this series, Vader's Castle, has a very interesting publication background. So even before mentioning anything, I love this release. I love the whole use of the black paper plus the ribbon strip tracker for it. I love that they included it. But you'll notice that this book is actually published, or at least this collected edition is published by Dark Horse. What's interesting is this. This is basically originally produced by IDW. Basically, Marvel, or should I say Disney, gave IDW the print license for the younger reader Star Wars comics. And then, I guess by the time this came out, Marvel had actually given the rights, or should I say Disney had given the rights to Dark Horse to, print future stories. So that's how Dark Horse ended up producing this particular release. But I just find the whole irony behind it all quite intriguing. But what I love about this story, once again, Cavan Scott, it's like he's a writer from back in the day. He references so much of the Star Wars past, like the whole Gorax thing for anybody who read the, or should I say saw all those old Ralph McQuarrie arts or even watched the old Ewok movies. It's pretty awesome to see that this gets referenced. But also just incredibly well done art. So like the story kind of has this like main narrative going on where these people crash land on Mustafar and they just happen to crash land near Vader's castle. And an odd way of getting over their fears is they start telling each other horror stories, which is why you'll see the art kind of juxtaposes between artists and the main series. But you're getting awesome referencing here and surprisingly heavy narratives. Like this isn't just your typical young reader book. Like people are dying left, right, and center in it. I guess because it kind of has that horror motif to it. But nonetheless, awesome release. And as you can see, a very premium feel, even down to the black pages. So awesome job there, Dark Horse. Definitely a worthy pickup for your library. All right, kicking off the new releases of 2024 at least. Yes, we're going to start off with the only book that's actually not an omnibus from Marvel this time, in the Treasury edition of Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red. So yes, this is one of those anthology books where, yeah, there's a lot of stories just that kind of blend within one and the other. They're not necessarily linear, but, each story is its own thing, which is great because it gives you different aspects. Personally, the highlight story that kind of has an ongoing thread is this one, The Hard Shutdown by Jason Aaron and Leonard Kirk. I'll say this, Leonard Kirk, he did his job phenomenally. Jason Aaron, though, I guess without realizing it, he actually just told a story that's been repeated so many times over. Like Hayden Blackman basically wrote the same concept not too long ago. But nonetheless, you are getting more esoteric stories. Yeah, you'll have like Peach Momoko's awesome narrative here. Very deep and very artistic. Let's just put it that way. Super awesome ideas being implemented. And one of my favorites, this one being from Klaus Janson. It is a pretty awesome story. But probably one of my favorites is, yes, this here. DWJ's story. Love this one to death. You can already see it, that pulp ferocity that DWJ is known for. Daniel Warren Johnson to the layman. But yeah, you're even getting graphic design where you have to kind of shift the page to truly appreciate what's going on. This book absolutely nails the menace of Vader. Like, it's super awesome. Like, he's so badass in this story. So amazing to have. And it's literally followed up by one of my other favorite stories that has so many awesome references in it. Like, yeah, the reference to Alien, those films, Lieutenant Sulaco, same name as one of the ships. Love that aspect. And I love the whole red herring idea of this story. Because by the end of it, you're like, damn, Vader is that cunning and he's that malicious. Man, he really is a tyrant. Like, incredibly well written and well conceived for such a brief story. Impressive nonetheless. But another thing I really love about these Treasury editions is that they kind of, draw the line between a soft cover and a hardcover. So they're not quite either. They're kind of vinyl hardcover, so to speak. So they're protected with a little bit of flexibility. I love this approach that Marvel has, and hopefully they do it a little bit more for more prominent releases. One thing they've done very well is like other series like Silver Surfer Black or, the Demon Wars stories and whatnot. All right, here comes one of my favorites of this year with The Punisher Max Omnibus. This one being a reprint of Garth Ennis's earlier Omni. And yeah, some of the highlight artists are, Luis La Rosa and Leandro Fernandez. I love those two on this particular book. Fernandez, you'll kind of appreciate his art a lot more when you realize that the colorist changed on him and his art just looks so much better on the other book. But nonetheless, you are getting a pretty visceral take of the Punisher as per the Max series. And it's almost like the Punisher was made for that print. Like, I feel like you can't really tell the Punisher in any other format. Because, yeah, you can't really capture his crazy mania as well as you can in this book with that complete freedom. Like, just seeing him just straight up manipulate one of his COs into killing themselves. Pretty heavy, with the first story being the whole Vietnam War aspect. Realizing, yeah, Punisher, he was crazy from the beginning. But yeah, it does kind of blend more into the modern day. Or should I say, at least the Punisher that we all know here. I love the whole dichotomy with, yeah, him and Micro's relationship in this particular story, when he's basically being recruited to the CIA, whatever. But I love the artwork. I remember this being like a wallpaper on my laptop for years. So awesome to have that. But yes, yeah, just the whole breakdown there. Here's the Kitchen Irish story. I love this one because it kind of shows you that crime never will come to an end. You know, it just gets replaced by, like, from the Irish mob to the Westies in this case, and kind of the brutal tactics that they have. It's almost like the world is just in want of the Punisher to correct things. Pretty heavy narrative there. And probably one of my favorite parts of this book. I mean, sure, this one I believe is what? Mother Russia. Pretty awesome story. Like a pretty over-the-top rescue mission. Let's just put it that way. Pretty damn awesome. I love the ground that this one covers, but probably one of my favorite aspects of this book is the last story, or one of the last stories, with the Nick Cavella story. They create such a perfect villain worthy of the Punisher's wrath, so it's pretty awesome to be able to do that. So great job by Garth Ennis in that sense. Go figure, this is the same guy who did The Preacher, right? So makes sense that he knows how to write those kind of stories. But very well researched as well, especially for that Vietnam War storyline. Very impressive that it was, very in-depth and really captures the insanity of Frank Castle very well. But yeah, very loaded with decent and appropriate bonus material. There is an introduction in the beginning, so that does count as your interview, so to speak, but definitely a must-have for your bookshelf. All right, here comes another reprint of 2024 with Uncanny X-Men Volume 2. Which pretty much wraps up the Dark Phoenix story, as you're kind of seeing here with the Stuart Immonen rendering. But yeah, one thing I definitely appreciate about this book is the ground that it covers. So yeah, it does wrap up, as mentioned, the Jean Grey Dark Phoenix storyline. So yeah, when she went a little too overboard, destroying that planet and whatnot, and the consequences of it thereafter. But I like how the cover that Stuart Immonen did, it really does do a proper homage to the original here, so definitely love that. This is kind of that same period where, the transition between Scott Summers after the events of Dark Phoenix kind of transitioned to Storm's leadership of the X-Men. One of my favorite X-Men overall. It really does capture it perfectly, if you ask me. It also has that incredible Days of Future Past storyline. Awesome to have. You'd be surprised. It's not as long as you may remember it to be, but it's definitely awesome to see. And yeah, basically this is when, like, Dave Cockrum and John Byrne definitely started having a greater presence on the X-Men franchise. Super awesome to have there. And at least in this case, as mentioned in that earlier Omni, the, Mutant Massacre Omni, where it included the trial of Magneto, or X-Men versus Avengers as it's wrapped up, that story kind of references these very pivotal moments in Magneto's war on humankind. So yeah, the destruction of the submarine and the destruction of that city. So yeah, very, very prominent storytelling here. Not to mention a little bit more of Storm's background and even her background with Black Panther, well before they got married many years later, and then ultimately got divorced, right? But still, impressive stuff that's covered in this book. Not to mention these awesome little bios that lead into the alternate take of the Dark Phoenix story. But yeah, I love this particular set of inks that were used in this particular narrative. Awesome to have. And yeah, there's that alternate take of the Dark Phoenix story here. Very impressive that they included it in this particular release. I have to say, I hope they reprint Volume 1, because at least this one book, I can assure you, no printing errors. But Volume 1, unfortunately, it looks like we're going to need a new reprint because that book is literally missing 20 pages. But yeah, I can at least assure you, Volume 2, all good, and a great release for 2024. All right, here comes one of my favorite reprints of 2024 with the original Captain America run. So yeah, this is when he first came back. It is missing that Avengers issue where, yeah, they dug him out of the ice, but this is predominantly when he had his own series alongside Iron Man, basically. And it is also the return of Jack Kirby doing incredible work on this character. I tell you, man, some of the action scenes are pretty impressive, but one of my best and favorite aspects of this book is how much it tackles the ideas of PTSD before PTSD became more of a common phrase. You know, Cap really reeling from the effects of not just being frozen and losing everybody near him, but even just, coming back from the war. But yeah, aside from that, you are getting like sometimes the first introductions of many important Marvel items, such as the Cosmic Cube in this issue. Incredibly well done, if you ask me. That awesome initial fight between Cap and Batroc, one of the best kinetic aspects that you will ever see Jack Kirby perform. It is incredible how well the motion works in this. Even later in this book, again, you're getting even more of it. That's something that Jack Kirby was known for. Like all of his images and all of the panel work, it all feels like it's moving. Even Cap, just the simple action of Cap taking off his jacket, it just has that sense of motion, Everything just feels like it's constantly moving. That frenetic style that Jack Kirby introduced. It's funny how like folks today, they tend to criticize Jack Kirby's art now, but it's like, yeah, man, just appreciate what's really going on in this art. That, yeah, you're just constantly seeing the flow of action just continue onward and onward. Incredible work. Yeah, I've always been a sucker for Captain America. I don't know what it is with me and captains. Captain Marvel is my favorite. Captain America is right up there too. It's just impressive work nonetheless. And yes, a worthy reprint that, does fix some of the printing errors from before. So very happy that they really tackled this one with care. So great job, Marvel. Definitely worthy of someone's bookshelf, that's for sure. All right, here comes one of my favorite releases of 2024. Yet another reprint with Daredevil by Brubaker and Lark. This is Volume 2 that kind of wraps up Brubaker's run before leading into Shadowland. But yeah, this is essentially kind of like what I always like to refer to with Batman. There's like a story arc that's called the Fall of the Batman. This is kind of what I consider the fall of Daredevil. Although, yeah, he falls quite often, right? He's often that tortured hero. And that's kind of how this book plays out as well. But I love the writing by Brubaker. Like, he doesn't treat readers like fools. Like, these characters, they're extremely human. They're extremely flawed. And who better to show that with than Matt Murdock in this case? Because, yeah, he's just becoming more and more out of control, more and more violent. At this point in the story, what happened to his wife happened. What he does in the background, behind her back, very, very sketchy, let's just put it that way. But it all kind of leads toward this degradation of Matt Murdock that kind of leads toward Shadowland. And that even though, you may have great intentions, not everyone wants to be saved. You may have a master plan, a great legal defense to get somebody out, but sometimes you just can't help somebody if there's ulterior motives going on, You don't know necessarily what they're thinking. So I appreciate like how every character kind of treats Matt Murdock in this, because basically his secret's out. So I love how Ed Brubaker kind of plays around with that idea that people know, but they can't confirm that he's Daredevil kind of thing. So everybody's kind of walking on eggshells with him. But another aspect of this book I loved was the way of how they handled the Black Tarantula, where he's pretty much this redeemed criminal. Basically, he's a superhero, you can almost say. Actually, he is a straight up vigilante, just like Daredevil. Basically, he's Daredevil with a healing factor, essentially. But super awesome narrative, a very intriguing character. You feel for him quite a bit. They really make him the proper sympathetic cause, that's for sure. But yeah, seeing this narrative and like I said, the aftermath of what Matt did behind his wife's back, pretty heavy. It all leads to him just growing more and more despondent toward everyone to ultimately lead towards Shadowland. But I love the intrigue. I love all the little subterfuge that's going on in this narrative. As usual, it's not really a surprise when you have Ed Brubaker on a book. Like, he just knows how to handle street level storytelling so incredibly well. He's a master. He's hands down my favorite. And this is pretty much the last Ed Brubaker book you're going to see in this video, I promise. Alright, now comes an actual new release of 2024, so not a reprint this time, but it's the incredibly amazing Donny Cates' Thor. So yes, this series, incredible. It's just a perfect testament to what Donny Cates has been, very much known for these days, which is knowing how to do his homework. So the reason why I bring that up is because Donny Cates, he references a lot of Thor in general, like his past histories and whatnot, hence what I mentioned earlier during the Honourable Mentions, where he manages to incorporate a lot of the core of Thor, well, that rhymed, but a lot of the original elements of Thor extremely well to craft this story. So yeah, it does start off with that awesome Black Winter narrative, with even Galactus seeming to be even vulnerable to it, like the end of everything. That's an idea that was kind of introduced in Silver Surfer Black. But such an incredible story. You're getting a more and more, I guess, power-mad version of Thor, while still being a bit more controlled. It's a very interesting take that Donny Cates goes with here, but super awesome. I love the design work by Nick Klein. Incredible. That also leads into yet another aspect of Thor's origins, or his core of his character, with the whole Donald Blake return. Love the way that this was reimagined. This narrative was so gripping because it actually felt like it had legitimate stakes, and that Thor couldn't really deal with all the external factors that were going on. Super awesome story, and I love the way that this was all wrapped up. Now, yes, one thing about this story is that it does kind of lead toward different writers eventually taking over toward the end. But the one thing I appreciate a lot about Donny Cates is he's a writer that believes in putting the toys back in the toy box. That's something that some writers do or forget to do. They'll take over a series, they'll do these bombastic things that are incredible, just to get some sales, and also have this emotional impact to the stories. But sometimes they leave it pretty much in shambles for the next writer. The one thing I love about Donny Cates is he did what he did, and he still managed to put the toys back in the toy box, so to speak, for the next writer to play with, essentially. But love the ground that this covers, even the whole Black Order inclusion toward the end. Yeah, this was kind of leading toward that King in Black storyline as well around that time. But still, I love the way that this book was approached. No writer should really not look at this book and be like, this is a blueprint of how to get it done in this modern age of comic book writing. So, incredible work. There's a reason why Donny Cates is constantly being talked about, because the man knows exactly what to do when it comes to writing for an original series, or should I say these Marvel and DC kind of characters. Handling them, creating these awesome events, while not tectonically changing everything forever. Writing his story and moving on. Masterful writer, if you ask me. Alright, and now comes one of the most pivotal releases of 2024 with DC versus Marvel. And yes, I did opt for the Jim Lee direct market cover because I do feel like this was a celebration of comics. So yeah, I did go out to my local shop to pick it up. And yes, I do appreciate the art on it. And I also appreciate the fact that it's actually published by DC. It's not to say that Marvel is a bad company or anything. It's just, I guess because they release so many different books, they tend to be more guilty of printing errors. Whereas DC, yeah, they're not, devoid of printing errors themselves, but it happens a lot less. And they tend to have a bit more integrity. For instance, the Amalgam companion that's coming out later, it got pushed because there was a printing error, and they wanted to correct that before releasing it. But nonetheless, at least this particular release, definitely feel like a lot of people should have it on their shelves. Because sure, it starts off with that, Superman, Spider-Man, Battle of the Century here. Amazing art. Not bad for the 70s, right? I believe this was, 76? But yeah, incredibly well thought out story. And that's one thing I appreciate about a lot of these stories. Is that it's like these writers, they knew that they were not going to get another chance at this. So they really took this opportunity and really wrote surprisingly impressive stories. Even this one here, the X-Men and Teen Titans narrative, which almost feels like it should be canon. That's how on point it was. it was written around the time of the whole Dark Phoenix thing. So it lines up so perfectly. But that's kind of my point, is that you got to like a lot of creators who are really passionate about making a lot of these stories, not just, fit, make them make sense as well, both aesthetically and narratively. So yeah, this Batman Punisher one of my favorites. There you go with Ramita. Denny O'Neill's also on this book as well. And there's Batman and Captain America. This is a John Byrne approach. One thing I loved about John Byrne's story here is that not only did he do the art, he did the writing as well. And he even modified his aesthetic, because this one's supposed to be like a period piece as well. But nonetheless, this book is surprisingly awesome. I definitely appreciate it. And it does make sense that it has a bevy of bonus material, as you're kind of seeing here. So super impressed. And yes, this is most certainly a release that folks should definitely have on their bookshelves. Certainly a pickup. Definitely pick it up. That's what I would say. And yeah, maybe just a little bit of the exterior here. Because yeah, Jim Lee's work is definitely something to behold, especially when he gives it his all like this. So awesome stuff. All right, now on to Star Wars related Marvel. And in this case, we have the volume 2, essentially, of the original Star Wars run. So right after the Jason Aaron run, then began Kieran Gillen and Greg Pak with Sal Roca, Phil Noto, and Angel Unzueta. And this is essentially the series that also still takes place between episode 4 and 5, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. After all, that is kind of the longest period of the Galactic Civil War in the movies, at least. But anywho, again, this is an awesome and very strong narrative. Again, Kieran Gillen coming off of the Darth Vader run. Super awesome series. And yeah, I've always mentioned how cinematic that felt, and that kind of cinematic quality definitely shows up here. Heck, there's a lot of references to, the battles on Jeddah and how dilapidated the planet is after the Death Star, basically shot at it. So I like how you see the aftermath, that the planet it's not directly dead, but they're basically running on borrowed time. And I love how that narrative kind of plays out. A lot of Star Wars mysticism being employed while still feeling like Star Wars. I always felt that this scene here was always kind of a heartbreaker. Because a lot of people forget that Padme's father died in that initial attack there. So I always felt that was one of the most impressive pages of this entire book. But even in this series, they still don't happen to, forget about old characters. Like some of the ones that were introduced in that Rogue One film. This book kind of wraps those pieces up, like that commander, that CO, who was kind of an idiot in that film. He definitely gets his just desserts here. They think that they're going to stop Vader or they're buying time. No, you don't buy time with Vader. He still manages to cause problems. So I love that particular scene, the way it plays out. And as you're kind of seeing here with this book, they really nail the battles, the pacing of the fights. You can really kind of, gauge the geometry and the perspectives of the battle very well. So awesome to have it. Even this whole intrigue on that planet Hubin, where they kind of introduce this love interest for Luke, Tula. They actually try to add several love interests to Luke Skywalker, like Tula and then Warba a little bit later. But very intriguing narrative, especially when you realize there's much more weapons that can be used against lightsabers than just Mandalorian Beskar or anything like that. Love that they employed that kind of aspect to this story. Very impressive, actually. And one thing that I love about this book is it kind of harkens to this old Star Wars novel where it was like Vader versus Chewbacca. For those of you who remember that book, great. I forget the name of it, but I remember reading it, and I remember that Chewie beat Vader, which was such an awesome thing to realize. But when you read this story, it's kind of a nice reference to it. And it also gives you a greater aspect of the Star Wars universe that, life comes in all different forms, as you can kind of see with these rock people, so to speak. And it's kind of a tragedy that happens in that story there. Even this character here, Dar Champion, awesome narrative. You kind of see it coming a mile away. Can't deny it, but still, it does play out pretty awesomely. So, pretty impressive book, I gotta admit. And it's excellent. It's an excellent companion to the Jason Aaron Omni before jumping into the post Empire Strikes Back material. But awesome to have nonetheless. All right, on to the last two Omnis, which are both from the Legends line, or more realistically, produced by Dark Horse Comics back in the day. with the first one being Tales of the Jedi. Man, I tell you, Marvel, one thing I give them a lot of props for is the way they map these books out, because they do it in a way where it fits the story the best, more than the publication order. So I always big up Marvel in this case for that awesome aspect. But yeah, this particular book, it does collect the incredibly amazing Dawn of the Jedi stories. So yeah, the ones that basically have Shea Koda, Seknos Wrath, and Tasha Rio, for instance. All of them against that new Jedi, or sorry, new Sith, I should say. What's his name? Zesh. Super awesome character. Pretty much in a nutshell, this page nails their histories. Incredible idea. The first kind of similar lightsaber kind of idea with the Force saber here. And yeah, I love how this story taking place like almost 35,000 years prior to the movies. I love how much that this story, it really encapsulates the core of what the Jedi were supposed to be, with these original characters that are called Jedi. I know it sounds similar, but it's actually different. And how much more powerful they were in the past. It's a pretty riveting story. I love how this story covers a lot of awesome ground. And my personal favorite character, Dagon Locke, he's like the original Qui-Gon Jinn, the original gray Jedi, you can say. Some people think he's like a straight up evil person, but yeah, there he is there. He's one of my favorite overall characters. Just the way he handles the Force or understands it. Super awesome. And then it also has the Hyperspace Wars, which are also known as the Great Sith War. So the whole power struggle between the big Sith Lords of, basically Marco Ragnos, Nagasado, and Ludo Kresh. You just kind of see this more ancient and more cryptic version of the Sith, and the way how brutal they used to be and how powerful they could be. You know, I guess all the origins of why they like to use their rage instead of, the more peaceful tactics. I do also appreciate how that story does kind of cover how the dark side doesn't always mean evil. Like there is sometimes a purpose and an actual, benefit to using one side of the Force or the other. So awesome to have. And I guess this book also, you can say, kind of completes itself with the tragedy of Ulic Qel-Droma. Some of my favorite Star Wars stories, like even before Revan, there's Ulic Qel-Droma. Yeah, and you'll probably hear about Exar Kun and all that jazz, but some of the art in this story, some of the ground that this story covers, it's a real tragedy. Like heroes lose, villains win, but ultimately, yes, in a very similar way to Revan, that character, you kind of get a similar catharsis. But the kind of ground that's covered in this book is pretty heavy. Like you're not just getting, the light side of Star Wars. You're getting pretty much a lot of the, seedy underground of Star Wars, like the slave trade, so to speak, the blue streets, so to speak, of Star Wars, that kind of aspect. But another thing I like about this book is how, because it's taking place throughout like many thousands of years prior, you'll see like ship design from like 35,000 years ago, then up to like 5,000 years prior to Star Wars, the movies. So I appreciate how you can see the differences in technologies being used as well. Very impressive work. Super awesome to own this. High recommends, must own kind of material, especially with the way Disney keeps borrowing from this material. So it seems like even though it's not canon, it might as well be canon because they keep borrowing from this material or referencing it. So definitely a pickup, that's for sure. All right, and now comes my favorite release of 2024 from Star Wars. And yes, for Marvel, technically this isn't even a Marvel book. This is actually a Dark Horse Comics book. That's what the Legends material is, after all. And this is the ultra awesome New Republic Volume 2. This is one of those few Omnis where I actually suggest you don't need to have Volume 1 to enjoy Volume 2 on its own. You can get this book all by itself, because this book is basically wish fulfillment in a nutshell. So yeah, for many years in my childhood, basically the Heir to the Empire story and Dark Empire were like, for me, the original episodes 7 and 8, the original sequels of the Star Wars trilogy. And yeah, we get this incredible work by Dan Dorman on the cover. But yes, as mentioned, this has the incredible stories of Heir to the Empire, which introduce, you have Mara Jade, Talon Karrde, and of course, Admiral Thrawn himself, Grand Admiral Thrawn, I should say. You get more of Luke Skywalker being the more Jedi mastered version of him. So far more confident, far more powerful than he's ever been. He's a master of his situations. He almost never gets scared or panicked. That's what I love about him in this book. This is like the Luke Skywalker we all kind of dreamed of when we were kids, like that real adventuring hero. But I love this particular story because it tackles so much ground. You have a villain who's actually really good at his job. Like, he actually stops the New Republic from actually succeeding in many, different dichotomies. Awesome. You have like a lot of espionage and, I guess backstabbing aspects of the storyline. Love it to death in that respect. And yeah, it does kind of conclude with the Last Command story here with, that deranged Jedi, Master Sabayoth, trying to create his own Jedi army. Crazy idea, and I love the kinetics of this whole situation. This book really did play like the film. Like, it had the same kind of pacing as most Star Wars films would have. I love this story to death. Seriously, my childhood personified right here. And in this respect, it does get followed up by yet another amazing story, the Dark Empire storyline that reintroduced the Emperor, also coming back through clone technology. Go figure. But yes, it does kind of have several super weapons like the World Devastators and the Galaxy Gun. It's great that at least Disney made these World Devastators canon, at least through that show, Star Wars Rebels. But man, absolutely love this series. This is early Dark Horse, so you'll kind of notice the way they use the color design, the color overlays. They mainly used in this kind of aesthetic for cost-saving measures. After all, they were a smaller company. But still, super love this book. Yeah, it has like the Jabba tapes at the beginning that kind of sets this story up. You get a far more darker, twisted version of Luke in this. Far more powerful, but far more dangerous. Introduces these ideas of, imbuing just regular people with the dark side of the Force. This is like a book that, existed before the introduction of the Sith word towards Star Wars, at least in its grander scope. But it also kind of reminds you that even the everyday human can still take them out, as you see here with Boba Fett just absolutely laying waste to these guys and making them fearful. Love this particular character, man. But yeah, such an awesome series. So great to have. The whole introduction of Luke creating his own Jedi army. Awesome. And it does kind of end with a bit more Boba Fett related material. So, him versus Jodo Kast here, the imposter, basically trying to sully Boba Fett's name throughout the universe. Interesting narrative. I love the way this story plays out. Very impressive. And some more classic, John Nadeau related Star Wars material here. Super awesome that they mapped this book out the way they did. That's one thing I'll give Marvel a lot of credit for. While they weren't the creators of this story, when they come out with them in omnibus format, they do such a damn good job of mapping them perfectly. But yeah, this is probably my personal pick of 2024 from Marvel, by proxy of Dark Horse, go figure. But nonetheless, these are just my picks of 2024 from Marvel. And I wouldn't mind seeing yours, maybe in the comments down below if you have any great ideas of your own. Or maybe some unique releases that y'all find more intriguing. Because admittedly, I do focus on hardcovers, so it's not because any stories are bad or anything. It's just because of my focus on hardcovers. I don't always pick up every particular release. But still, wouldn't mind seeing your ideas nonetheless in the comments down below. Y'all folks take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.